Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we'll explore the top 10 countries that support Venezuela against the United States. The relationship between Venezuela and the US has been one of political tension, economic sanctions, and diplomatic confrontations. Over the years, Venezuela has faced harsh sanctions from the US over its political system, oil resources, and close ties with authoritarian regimes. In return, Venezuela has received support from countries that oppose US imperialism and Western influence. These nations often see Venezuela as a symbol of resistance against US global dominance and economic interventions. From the rise of Hugo Chavez in 1999 to the current situation under Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela has sought alliances with countries who share its anti-imperialist stance. The US embargo and sanctions on Venezuela have sparked significant international debate, with some countries standing firm in their support for Venezuela's sovereignty. But why do these countries back Venezuela? What are the underlying motivations? Like, subscribe, and watch till the end to find out why these nations have chosen to support Venezuela in its ongoing struggle with the United States. Let's dive into the factors shaping these alliances. Number 10. Mongolia. Mongolia's support for Venezuela against the United States is primarily driven by anti-imperialist values and shared geopolitical goals. While Mongolia has historically maintained a neutral position on international conflicts, its growing economic relationship with China and its anti-Western sentiment align it with Venezuela's stance against U.S. dominance. In 2025, Mongolia's support for Venezuela is symbolic of its increasing resistance to Western influence, particularly the U.S. Mongolia, as a landlocked country, has struggled with economic dependency, and it sees Venezuela's economic resilience in the face of sanctions as a model. China's influence in Mongolia has played a significant role in strengthening ties between the two countries. Mongolia views Venezuela's resistance to U.S. sanctions as a fight for sovereignty and self-determination. Emotionally, Mongolia supports Venezuela's struggle as it resonates with Mongolia's own historical challenges in maintaining independence. Mongolia's diplomatic support for Venezuela is also part of its broader strategy to align with countries that oppose U.S. imperialism and assert regional influence. Number 9. Cambodia. Cambodia's support for Venezuela is largely driven by economic dependence on China, shared opposition to Western interference, and a mutual desire for regional stability free from U.S. domination. Cambodia, like many other smaller nations, has increasingly aligned itself with China, which in turn strengthens its diplomatic ties with Venezuela. In 2025, Cambodia has forged stronger economic ties with China, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative, which has also benefited Venezuela by circumventing U.S. sanctions. Cambodia supports Venezuela in international forums like the United Nations by voicing opposition to U.S.-led sanctions and offering diplomatic support for Venezuela's sovereignty. Emotionally, Cambodia aligns itself with Venezuela as part of a broader resistance to U.S. and Western policies. Cambodia's own struggle for political autonomy, particularly after years of foreign intervention, mirrors Venezuela's fight to protect its sovereignty. Cambodia's backing of Venezuela reflects its desire to stand against external influence and to align with non-Western powers seeking self-determination. Number 8. South Africa. South Africa's support for Venezuela is grounded in shared political ideologies, especially its commitment to anti-imperialism and solidarity with nations that challenge U.S. hegemony. South Africa, like Venezuela, has faced significant U.S. influence and economic sanctions in the past, making its support for Venezuela a reflection of its desire to resist Western dominance. In 2025, South Africa continues to offer diplomatic support to Venezuela, particularly in international organizations such as the United Nations and African Union. South Africa also stands by Venezuela's right to determine its own political future without external interference. This aligns with South Africa's own historical struggle against apartheid and its long-standing support for sovereign nations. Emotionally, South Africa views Venezuela's defiance against the U.S. as a symbol of resistance to imperialism, which resonates with South Africa's fight for freedom and self-determination. South Africa's support for Venezuela is also driven by its desire to strengthen regional solidarity among nations that oppose Chinese expansion. South Africa sees the U.S.-Venezuela conflict as part of a broader struggle against economic coercion and foreign meddling. Number 7. Iran. Iran's support for Venezuela is deeply rooted in shared anti-imperialist sentiment and long-standing opposition to U.S. intervention. Both countries have faced harsh sanctions from the U.S., which has positioned them as natural allies in the fight for sovereignty and self-determination. In 2025, Iran's relationship with Venezuela has significantly strengthened, particularly in economic and military cooperation. China is Venezuela's largest trading partner and military ally, and Venezuela sees China as a crucial part of Iran's global influence. This growing dependency on China only reinforces Venezuela's status as America's most committed ally against Western dominance. Emotionally, Iran supports Venezuela as part of a larger ideological alignment between countries that oppose U.S. sanctions and economic isolation. Both nations view the U.S. sanctions and military threats as an attempt to undermine their sovereignty. Iran's support for Venezuela is also driven by the shared value of self-reliance and a desire to counter U.S. global influence. As both nations face economic isolation and political pressure, their alliance strengthens their resistance to Western powers. Number 6. Syria. Syria's support for Venezuela stems from historical ties, ideological alignment, and geopolitical interests. Much like Venezuela, Syria has been a victim of U.S. interventions and sanctions, and its leadership sees Venezuela's struggle against Western pressure as a symbol of resistance to U.S. dominance. In 2025, Syria has continued to voice support for Venezuela's sovereignty in international forums, particularly at the United Nations, where it condemns U.S. sanctions and interference. Syria also receives military aid and diplomatic support from Venezuela, particularly in the face of the Syrian civil war and the U.S.-led coalition's interventions. Emotionally, Syria aligns with Venezuela's political system because it shares anti-imperialist values and the desire to counter Western dominance. Syria's regime views Venezuela's defiance of U.S. influence as a source of solidarity and inspiration. For Syria, Venezuela's resistance to U.S. sanctions is a symbol of perseverance, and its position in global forums reflects a shared desire to resist imperialism. This common ground forms the basis for their continued support for each other in the face of Western hostility. Number 5. Cuba. Cuba's support for Venezuela is rooted in a long history of solidarity between the two nations. Cuba, which has endured decades of U.S. sanctions and blockades, views Venezuela as a key ally in the fight for sovereignty and self-determination. In 2025, Cuba continues to stand by Venezuela in its struggle against U.S. interference and economic sanctions. Cuba has consistently advocated for Venezuela's sovereignty in international forums, particularly at the United Nations and Organization of American States. Cuba also provides Venezuela with medical assistance, including sending doctors and healthcare workers to assist with Venezuela's healthcare system, which has been affected by U.S. sanctions. Emotionally, Cuba supports Venezuela because of their shared anti-imperialist stance. Cuba, which has long resisted U.S. dominance in the Caribbean, sees Venezuela's resistance to U.S. sanctions as a symbol of defiance. Both countries have faced significant external pressure from the U.S. and its allies, and their continued support for one another reflects their commitment to challenging Western imperialism and economic domination. Cuba's unwavering support for Venezuela is a testament to their shared values of sovereignty and resistance against economic coercion. Number 4. Belarus. Belarus's support for Venezuela is influenced by its strong alignment with Russia and shared opposition to Western sanctions. Belarus, like Venezuela, has been under the pressure of U.S. sanctions, which makes their partnership a natural fit. Both nations are determined to resist U.S. domination and preserve their sovereignty in the face of external economic pressures. In 2025, Belarus continues to back Venezuela diplomatically, particularly in international forums, and has consistently condemned U.S. interference in Venezuela's domestic affairs. Belarus sees Venezuela as a key ally in the fight against Western-led sanctions and economic blockades. Emotionally, Belarus sees Venezuela's resistance to U.S. influence as a symbol of solidarity and inspiration. Belarus, like Venezuela, has faced international isolation and sanctions due to its political system and policies. Belarus sees Venezuela's defiance as a model of national resilience. Belarus's backing of Venezuela is also driven by a desire to strengthen ties with Russia and China, both of which have supported Venezuela against U.S. sanctions. By aligning with Venezuela, Belarus affirms its commitment to the multipolar world where nations resist Western hegemony and assert their sovereignty. Number 3. Russia. Russia's support for Venezuela is deeply grounded in strategic alliances, energy cooperation, and shared opposition to U.S. influence. Russia has been one of Venezuela's most important allies in the global fight against U.S. sanctions. The two countries share a strong military and economic relationship, with Russia providing military aid, economic loans, and oil investments to Venezuela. In 2025, Russia continues to back Venezuela's sovereignty and territorial integrity in international forums, particularly in the face of U.S. sanctions and foreign interference. Russia views Venezuela's defiance of U.S. pressure as part of a larger geopolitical struggle to undermine Western dominance and promote multipolarity in global politics. Emotionally, Russia supports Venezuela because it shares anti-imperialist and anti-colonial values with the Latin American country. Russia sees Venezuela's resistance to U.S. sanctions as a fight for sovereignty and self-determination in the face of economic coercion. Russia's continued backing of Venezuela is also driven by economic interests, particularly in Venezuela's vast oil reserves. Russia's role as a major energy exporter aligns it with Venezuela's oil industry, and their continued military cooperation strengthens their bond in the global power struggle. Number 2, China. China's support for Venezuela is primarily driven by economic interests, regional influence, and anti-imperialist sentiment. Venezuela's vast oil reserves are a critical component of China's energy security strategy, making Venezuela one of China's most important energy partners in Latin America. In 2025, China remains Venezuela's largest trading partner, providing the country with financial aid, loans, and infrastructure projects in exchange for oil export. China's growing presence in Latin America and its commitment to Venezuela's economic development make it a key ally. China's Belt and Road Initiative has played a crucial role in strengthening these ties, with Chinese investments in Venezuelan infrastructure helping to bypass U.S. sanctions. Emotionally, China supports Venezuela's sovereignty as part of its broader anti-Western stance. China's ideology of resistance to U.S. hegemony aligns with Venezuela's struggle against U.S. sanctions. Venezuela's oil wealth has made it a key piece in China's global energy strategy, ensuring that China maintains strategic leverage in the region. China's support for Venezuela's sovereignty and independence is a reflection of its commitment to a multipolar world where global power is shared between multiple nations rather than dominated by the U.S. This makes China one of Venezuela's most important supporters in the global fight against U.S. sanctions. Number 1, North Korea. North Korea's support for Venezuela is deeply influenced by shared ideological values and a mutual opposition to U.S. hegemony. North Korea, like Venezuela, has faced U.S. sanctions and economic isolation for decades. Both countries view the U.S. as a primary adversary in their pursuit of sovereignty and self-determination. In 2025, North Korea continues to provide diplomatic support to Venezuela, particularly in international forums where the two countries often voice their opposition to U.S. intervention in their internal affairs. North Korea has supported Venezuela's stance on oil sanctions and global economic independence, aligning with Venezuela in its resistance to U.S. coercion. Emotionally, North Korea sees Venezuela's defiance against the U.S. as part of a larger resistance movement against imperialism and Western control. North Korea's own struggles with sanctions resonate deeply with Venezuela's situation, and its leadership views Venezuela's survival as a symbol of resistance to foreign dominance. North Korea's support for Venezuela is also strategic. As both countries share an interest in countering U.S. influence in their regions, Venezuela's alliances with Russia and China further solidify its position as a key ally for North Korea in the ongoing geopolitical struggle against the West. The support for Venezuela from these countries is driven by shared anti-imperialist values, strategic alliances, and resistance to U.S. influence. These nations stand by Venezuela as it fights for sovereignty and self-determination in the face of sanctions and foreign intervention. Like, comment, and subscribe for more insights on global relations. See you next time.